Hey everyone listening, this is Marcus, Dev Relations at Soulbound Labs, and I'm super excited to have Alexander Gusev. Am I pronouncing that last name correctly?
Yeah, Gusev. Yeah, you threw in a T
Gusev.
there. A lot of
Gusev.
people do that. Yeah.
Gotcha. Alexander Gusev. I've
Yes.
actually never said your last name. We just call him by a blind nabbler on the Discord and on our different interwebs, intercoms. And he is our one of our back-end devs. And I wanted to take a few minutes with him and really talk to him about what excites him as a back-end developer about the studio that Soulbound Labs developing, Soulbound Studio. So before we get into that question, Alex, if you could tell the listeners a little bit about your background, your experience, as well as what you do for Soulbound Labs, and then what excites you about Soulbound Studio.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So I guess like a little bit about myself. I'm 21 years old, been a programmer for a number of years at this point. And I guess like one of the real takeoff points in my career, one of the definitive moments in my career, was when I started becoming or I guess I started experimenting a lot. And one of the tools that made this really possible within Web3 was this piece of software that Austin Griffith built called ETH Build, which is a visual way to interact with the blockchain. So it has a lot of these different functions that are present within Web3.js and, different sort of ways to interact with the blockchain in a node-based editor type way. And being able to like visually see how these different pieces are connected to each other in a GUI versus, a JavaScript package was super, super useful for my learning because I was able to be like, okay, well, what if this is possible? And, I think asking this what if and having a playground to experiment with ideas is super important. And so like, this is kind of what we're trying to do with Soulbound Studio. However, we're trying to do this with subgraphs. So we're trying to create a playground and a visual way to experiment and learn and also build meaningful subgraphs in a way that abstracts away a lot of the complexity with, assembly script and subgraphs as a whole and tries to simplify it and make it a better experience for everyone. And so, yeah, Soulbound Studio is basically just trying to make subgraphs accessible and easily experimentable, if that's a word.
Yeah, that's a word. So for you as a developer of years who's used subgraphs and used the Subgraph Studio, for you, what would you like to potentially do if you could look back at yourself entering subgraph development, entering Web3 development, and you were a brand new developer? What do you think Soulbound Studio would provide to you?
Well, there's a number of different things, and I think one of the most apparent is just how easy subgraphs are to work with. A lot of people don't really understand, at least like skilled developers and experienced developers. I think that they don't realize how many headaches a lot of these providers provide for developers when they're learning how to use them. The fact that, Infura and Alchemy and all these different things, they have their own specialized APIs and these, and they're all very different. And sometimes they're not exactly clear. Or they don't do exactly what you want them to do. This is the really nice part about subgraphs is that you have a more standard schema that you can build out to extract the data that you want and you need. And as a front-end developer, if you're integrating anything blockchain related in the front end, or even you're just trying to query meaningful data, it is so much simpler with a subgraph and making your call within a single GraphQL request. It just provides a much, much simpler and nice experience for a developer to use. Yeah, I mean, I don't. Sorry, can you repeat the question too?
Yeah, no, it's all good. It's all good. No, you're doing great. Yeah, I was just asking, like, when you just started Web3, and let's say you didn't know too much about the graph and you were going into it, what would this provide for you as a brand new developer going into it and saying, oh my gosh, what does Soulbound Studio do for a newbie?
Yeah. So basically, like, yeah, for a new developer, what it does is it just abstracts away a lot of the complexity that comes from querying blockchain data and allows you to just generate a single API endpoint that you build out specific to what you want to do. So it's almost like a domain specific language for a smart contract you're working with that hides all the complexity behind a couple easy to understand interfaces for what you're interacting with, which is very, very powerful.
That's awesome. What are some of the specific features within Soulbound Studio that do some of these things, that abstract the difficulties away, that you've worked on?
So, I mean, probably one of the main things is just this whole code generation bit that we work on. So one of the main features of Soulbound Studio is that you can paste in any smart contract address and it will grab all the important information, and it will also break down this contract into all of the meaningful events there, and then extract all that data directly into a subgraph that's ready for deployment. And this is super powerful because you don't need to learn anything else. So like if you look at the contract, you can see what events are being emitted and what context they're being emitted in, and then instantly build an interface to query those events, as well as like all the extra transaction details that are there. Which is super, super nice because, again, it just simplifies the amount of things you need to learn to get developing. Because if you know what a smart contract is, you don't even really have to know Solidity. You can just kind of understand conceptually how they work. You can create an interface or an API for extracting data from that, directly from that, which is really, really cool. Because the alternative there is you need to learn a bunch of stuff about providers and how these JSON RPC endpoints work. Or if you're interested in subgraphs, you need to learn assembly script and all these nuances. And this just, again, really abstracts away a lot of those details and just allows people to like get built-in instantly and get experimenting instantly, which is super powerful in my opinion.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. So to kind of piggyback on that conversation, right now you're quite experienced within subgraphs, within all of these different languages. What would Soulbound Studio provide to an experienced developer such as yourself or any other experienced developers in Web3?
Yeah. So, I mean, within that, it's a number of different things. I mean, off the bat, the abilities to just instantly create a subgraph for a generic subgraph, something we call a proto subgraph, for any smart contract that I'm working on or any smart contract that I'm even curious on, it's super, super nice because, again, you have this flat schema type, which is specific to the contract you're working on. And I can do really meaningful queries just from this kind of base smart contract. And to give an example of this, for Gitcoin grants, there was a retroactive NFT that Kevin Iwaki wanted built. And he was like, let's give an NFT to every user who donated to Gitcoin grants before grants round 14 was over. And normally, collecting all this information is kind of a pain in the ass because you need to go back and filter through like either transaction logs or other stuff. But you can do this in literally 3 minutes, 4 minutes using Soulbound Studio, because basically what you do is you just plug in the Gitcoin grants smart contract and then it parses all the events. And then you just basically make a single request and you're saying, hey, I want all of the addresses that interacted with this contract before this timestamp. And that timestamp was the end of Gitcoin grants around 14. And so this is just a super elegant solution to this problem. And it just makes, again, like this data and extracting data super, super easy and really fast for developers. Because there's nothing worse than being inspired on a project and then you have to write a bunch of boilerplate and get started. It just sucks.
Awesome. Awesome. So let's say, okay, we have all this data now, and I know there's a feature in Soulbound Studio that we're working on to put this data into React elements, into different types of front-end type of modules. Could you speak to that where, okay, it's super easy for a newbie or experienced developer to see value in this? What about that next step where we actually put that data into some React elements as well as other possible integrations?
Yeah, totally. And, I think like a lot of what we do and a lot of the stuff that we do is heavily dog fooded. And really a lot of the stuff we build and the products that we build are being built out of necessity and kind of that it makes sense within our workflows. And so like data visualization is super important. And how great would it be to just have a bunch of ready to use components? So let's say visualize all of those addresses and visualize the differences between those addresses within the context of like the grants round 14 example that I gave. And so basically like this is just another really powerful thing that again reduces time spent developing for stuff that isn't important and allows you to better harness inspiration to just build things quickly and not have to worry about, again, like writing boilerplate and reusing these things, which are very, very reusable components. You just don't need to write it from scratch every time. It's better to have, I guess, a flat and readily available example there, ready for use and tweaking.
Awesome. Awesome. So we have a lot of other things in the pipeline coming up in the future, but right now I want to specifically talk about the ERC20 template, as well as there's another template that we're working on. Could you talk about, I think we have 2 templates that you guys are cooking up right now. Could you speak to those and what those are how those might be exciting for you?
Yeah, for sure. So I guess we're kind of cooking them up. They're also not really cooked up by us, because really we're just like integrating these Masari subgraphs into Soulbound Studio to make it easy to deploy these Masari subgraphs that have, their pre-built schema types and whatever else for these template contracts that you work with. So for instance, ERC 721 contracts, if you want to start tracking an NFT or set of NFTs, you can do this quite simply by just using our software, which spins up everything, like I guess people are aware of, or if they're not aware of, makes it very easy to do so. And so they give you, it's a step above these more general smart contract derived schema types and structures for your data. And this instead provides you really, really useful kind of snapshots and stuff like this that are important for, let's say, an NFT or a token that you're watching, such as like, daily volume, daily price action, differentials, stuff like this. There's a lot of just nice data that they have wrapped up within these template contracts. And so if you know what kind of contract you're working with, it makes it very, very easy to extract super meaningful data out of, as opposed to just more generally meaningful data.
Awesome. That's awesome. So we'll start wrapping this up here. I want to ask 2 questions on the uses for use cases on Soulbound Studio. First off, we've got a few hackathons coming up. Let's say you are a hackathon dev and you are working on a project. How would you want to use Soulbound Studio in the project? How would you want to say, hey, I've got this right here. What problem does this solve?
Oh yeah, it solves a ton of problems. Like as far as hackathon goes, you're under an extremely, extremely constricted time here. And so everything that you can do to reduce boilerplate and just build stuff and not be worried about building, infrastructure and stuff like that for your projects is extremely valuable. And so Soulbound Studio does a phenomenal job at this, because if you have a contract, you've deployed it, or anything else, you can instantly generate an API endpoint for use in your front end. So you don't have to worry about querying your contract via a provider. Instead, you can use the graph as your provider and extract all the meaningful data there, which is really nice, because again, it makes it a much smoother experience to go from idea into full-blown dApp, and just allows you to build and iterate a lot faster than somebody who has to do this all by hand. And there are times in which you want to do it by hand, but I would say for the most part, you're hard pressed to find, especially like in a hackathon type scenario, where you wouldn't want to use something like a proto subgraph for your front end, or even using it within the contract via the smart contract bridge or subgraph bridge or anything else.
Awesome. Awesome. And so, Alex, last question. For the space of Web3 and where the graph is, what do you think Soulbound Studio unlocks for the graph, as well as the goal of decentralization of data across the board?
A lot of different things. And I think probably one of the best sort of examples of this, or I guess like the best sort of comparison that I can make. The graph is a rad piece of technology. It is really cool to have these mappings on top of blockchain data that filter out this raw, pile of data into something that's super meaningful and instantly usable by a user. Or I guess by a user and a developer, all the same. But one of the problems with this is that it does use this language assembly script, and the whole process is not smooth to go from, nothing, you have to learn about the graph, etc., And so this is really almost like a batteries included framework that allows you to very, very quickly, build something that's meaningful without having to really worry about a lot of these things. And so, like, I think a pretty good example is kind of like the language Ruby really took off when Rails came out. So like Ruby on Rails allowed things to really accelerate forward because it made the process super, super easy. And like Ruby is a really rad language, but a lot of people just kind of didn't really understand that until they really made it easy and accessible for people to start playing around with. And so I think that there's kind of a comparison there, something that can be drawn anyway.
Awesome. Well, Alex, thank you so much for your time. This has been super helpful. Yeah, of course. I'm really happy to have you on the team. Really happy to be working with you. And I'm happy to be helping out Web3 in general by your side, man. This is great.
Oh, yeah. I agree. Likewise, homie.
Awesome. We'll stay on the line here and I'll stop the recording. Take care, guys.
Peace.